The 5 unforgivable sins that led to the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Sodom and Gomorrah, 2 cities whose names have become synonymous with ultimate wickedness and divine retribution. Their destruction at the hands of God is one of the most well-known events in the Bible, alongside places like Jerusalem, the city of God, Bethlehem, where Christ was born, and Babylon, the seat of ancient empires. Sodom and Gomorrah stand out as warnings to the consequences of turning away from righteousness. Set during the time of Abraham and his nephew Lot, these twin cities descended into such moral decay that they became infamous for being utterly obliterated by God's judgment. Not a single structure, tree, or living being survived. The annihilation of these cities was so devastating that history seldom sees another case where entire cities were eradicated so completely because of their sins. It begs the question, what could they have done to deserve such an overwhelming display of God's wrath? Was there one sin in particular, or were there multiple offenses that sealed their fate? And more importantly, was homosexuality the primary cause for their destruction, as many believe? This episode will uncover the answers to these pressing questions, and what you find out may be more surprising than you expect. Before we dive into the deep revelations of this story, please support this channel by liking, sharing, and subscribing. Your engagement helps us grow, and we recently crossed 170,000 subscribers. Thank you for being part of this journey. And let's continue growing together as we aim for 1 million subscribers. Now, let's explore the mystery of Sodom and Gomorrah, starting with a comparison to another city that met a tragic end, Pompeii. In 79 AD, Pompeii was a bustling Roman city that lay in the shadow of Mount Vesuvius. The inhabitants of Pompeii lived their lives unaware that the mighty mountain over them would one day become their doom. On an ordinary day, without warning, Vesuvius erupted violently, sending ash, smoke, and molten lava spewing into the air. The city descended into chaos as panic gripped the people, but it was too late. A deadly wave of destruction engulfed the city, burying everything in its path under tons of fiery ash and debris. Pompeii was lost, its inhabitants frozen in time, hidden beneath the earth for centuries. The destruction of Pompeii, while catastrophic, was a natural disaster. Sodom and Gomorrah, on the other hand, faced the judgment of God. While we may never fully understand why nature obliterated Pompeii, we know with certainty why Sodom and Gomorrah were wiped from the face of the earth. It was their persistent sinfulness and their refusal to heed God's warnings. Their destruction serves as a chilling reminder of the consequences of turning away from God. In this episode, we will list the specific sins that led to the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, starting with the first and perhaps most all-encompassing sin. Sin number 1, wickedness. Wickedness is a broad term that encompasses all forms of evil behavior, and it was the foundation of Sodom and Gomorrah's demise. The Bible describes wickedness as the very antithesis of righteousness, goodness, and moral virtue. In Genesis 18:20-21, the Lord said, "Because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and their sin is very grave, I will go down to see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry that has come to me." This verse reveals that the cries of those suffering from the sins of Sodom and Gomorrah reached God's ears. The people had fallen so far from grace that their wickedness could no longer be ignored. What exactly is wickedness? It refers to actions or intentions that are deliberately harmful, cruel, or malicious. It includes deceit, violence, dishonesty, and the intentional infliction of suffering on others. Sodom and Gomorrah had become spools of corruption and moral decay. They were so far gone that redemption was no longer possible. God saw no other solution but to erase them completely from existence. In Genesis 18:23, Abraham, ever the intercessor, pleaded with God to spare the cities, if even a few righteous people could be found. Abraham asked, "Will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked?" God agreed that if just 10 righteous individuals could be found among the thousands of inhabitants, he would spare the cities. Unfortunately, not even 10 righteous souls were left, and the cities met their ultimate fate. Sin number 2, idolatry and idol worship. The second sin that contributed to the downfall of Sodom and Gomorrah was idolatry, the worship of false gods. While the Genesis account doesn't explicitly mention idolatry, it's clear that their ungodly behavior was rooted in the rejection of the one true God. In Romans 1:25, the Apostle Paul writes, "They exchanged the truth about God for a lie, and worshipped and served created things rather than the created." This sums up the essence of idolatry, placing worldly things like wealth, power, and fame above God. Idolatry is often intertwined with wickedness, because when people reject God, they open themselves up to all forms of evil. Without God's moral compass, the people of Sodom and Gomorrah became consumed by their desire for material possessions, pleasure, and self-indulgence. Their hearts were far from God, and their actions reflected their spiritual decay. This idolatry and moral corruption only deepened the chasm between them and God's mercy. Here is what Jeremiah said when he compared Sodom and Gomorrah to errant Jerusalem. "But in the prophets of Jerusalem, I have seen a horrible thing. They commit adultery and walk in lies. They strengthen the hands of evildoers so that no one turns from his evil. All of them have become like Sodom to me, and its inhabitants like Gomorrah." Jeremiah 23 verse 14. Sin number 3. Homosexuality. There are those who claim that the only reason God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah was the pervasive homosexual practice in the cities. I do not believe this. Homosexuality was certainly one of the sins of the people, but it was not the only one or even the worst. While homosexuality is sinful and immoral according to the Bible, it may not be considered wicked in the strictest sense of the word. That is because no one is physically hurt in the practice. Spiritually, well, that's a different matter. Still, homosexuality is a sin, and it is one of the many reasons God destroyed the city, but not the primary reason. Sodom and Gomorrah have become front and center in modern consciousness because of the growth and ubiquity of homosexuality. A huge part of the population now practices and advocates for homosexuality. Governments are creating laws supporting and legalizing gay and lesbian marriages. Even the Catholic Church has now said that homosexual couples can be blessed by Catholic priests. Check out my video on the topic. The link will be in the description. The word sodomized, which refers to the activities of male homosexuals, comes from the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. The term has also been used to refer to people who practice acts of perversion, usually of sexual kind. The main sin associated with Sodom and Gomorrah was not just homosexuality, it was sexual violence. As the population grew, so did their pervasive tendencies. Men and women began to twist God's intended purpose for sex, replacing it with vile and shameful passions. This is how Apostle Paul describes it. Because of this, God gave them over to shameful lusts. Even their women exchanged natural sexual relations for unnatural ones. In the same way, the men also abandoned natural relations with women and were inflamed with lust for one another. Men committed shameful acts with other men and received in themselves the due penalty for their error. Romans chapter 1 verses 26 to 27. If this is still not clear to you, this passage is talking about lesbians and gays, homosexuality. Paul says these actions are shameful because he did not say directly that it is a sin. Some have argued that it is not a sin but merely a distasteful sexual practice to Paul and many in his generation. They are wrong. It is not only that homosexuality is a sin, it is also in itself a punishment for sin. The Bible made things clearer in the following verses. Leviticus 18 verse 22, "You shall not lie with a male as with a woman. It is an abomination." Leviticus 20 verse 13, "If a man lies with a male as with a woman, both of them have committed an abomination." Jude 1 verse 7, "Just as Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding cities, which likewise indulged in sexual immorality and pursued unnatural desire, serve as an example by undergoing a punishment of eternal fire." There is nothing I can add to these to make it any clearer. If you are Christian and find yourself struggling with homosexual feelings, talk to Jesus about it and seek solace in the Holy Spirit. He will surely guide you to redemption. Sin number 4, idleness. It is hard to imagine idleness as a sin, but it is the source of many evils. Perhaps you are familiar with the proverb, "An idle mind is the devil's workshop." To be idle is to not be working towards any specific worthy goal. It is to miss the point, which is the true meaning of sin or hamartia. a Hebrew word that means to miss the mark. The people in Sodom and Gomorrah lived in wealth as affluence. They did not need to do much to make a living. This lack of passion for virtue soon turned into passion for evil as they became arrogant, prideful, and decadent. They felt entitled to whatever their hearts desired. Does this remind you of this generation? It does to me. This is how prophet Ezekiel describes it. Behold, this was the guilt of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters had pride, excess food, and prosperous ease, but did not aid the poor and needy. They were haughty and did an abomination before me. So I removed them when I saw it. Ezekiel 16 verses 49 to 50. Do not let your blessing of abundance make you goalless and aimless. We have been commissioned to work in the vineyard of Jesus Christ. If you are not doing anything to support that work, you are missing the mark. And that is a sin that can lead to a passion for decadence, arrogance, pride, lust, and shameful perversion, just like the inhabitants of Sodom and Gomorrah. Sin number 5, pride in sin. It is damning to be sinful, but even worse to be proud of your sin. The people of Sodom and Gomorrah did not only sin, they reveled in it. They enjoyed knowing that they lived in sin as they publicly published their sins, boasting about it to all who cared to listen. In other words, they lost the ability to hear the cautionary whisper of the Holy Spirit. Here is how Isaiah describes it. For Jerusalem has stumbled and Judah has fallen because their speech and their deeds are against the Lord, defying his glorious presence. The look on their faces bears witness against them. They proclaim their sin like Sodom. They do not hide it. Woe to them, for they have brought evil on themselves. Isaiah chapter 3 verses 8 to 9. The pride and arrogance of the people of Sodom and Gomorrah is summed up in the story of Lot and the 2 angels that visited him to warn him of the impending destruction of the cities. The angels arrived at Lot's house. However, before they could retire for the evening, a mob of men from Sodom, described as the men of the city, the men of Sodom, surrounded Lot's house. These men were notorious for their sinful, immoral, and violent behavior. They demanded that Lot bring out the 2 strangers so that they could have sexual relations with them. Lot was appalled by the wickedness of the men of Sodom, and Gomorrah tried to protect his guests. He even offered his own virgin daughters to the mob instead to placate them, even though the action itself is an abomination in the sight of God. Still, the men of Sodom and Gomorrah were consumed by their own passion. They wanted only to defy the male guests. Lot was determined to prevent the men from committing such shameful and sinful acts against his guests, but he was running out of options as the men started to threaten harm against Lot and his family. They were going to break down his door and come to rape the men in his house. Seeing Lot's futile resistance and impossible predicament, the angels decided to act. They struck the mob with blindness, preventing them from attacking Lot and gaining entrance into his house. Soon after, the angels told Lot of the impending destruction of the towns of Sodom and Gomorrah. They then led Lot and his family out to escape the impending destruction of Sodom. If you are shocked by Lot's willingness to offer his daughters to the mob, you are not alone. It might tell of his determination to protect his guest, something that was seen as sacrosanct in that culture. But it also speaks of the way women were unfairly treated by men. Oftentimes, they were nothing more than a bargaining chip, as Lot demonstrated with his own daughters. In the face of provocation, Lot compromised. He could not muster the faith to defend his own values and the chastity of his daughters to the end. The observant listener will notice that this is not very different from what people do today. Many so-called Christians spend their lives compromising their Christian values in order to placate other people with questionable values. They cave under the slightest pressure from peers in social media and other places. If there is anything we can learn from Lot, it is that if you walk with the unrighteous, you will soon be asked to carry their baggage of sin to end the biblical story of Lot and the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. After Lot and his family were led to safety by the angels, the Lord rained brick and fire on Sodom and Gomorrah. The cities were completely destroyed under God's uncompromising judgment. Like Pompeii, it was buried deep in ashes and sand. In summary, the story of Sodom and Gomorrah serves as one of the Bible's most powerful warnings about the consequences of sin. These cities were not only destroyed for their wickedness, idolatry, sexual immorality, and pride, but also for their complete disregard for God's grace and mercy. Their sins were so pervasive and unforgivable that total annihilation was the only answer. This serves as a reminder that no one is immune from the consequences of living a life detached from moral principles and divine guidance. Reflecting on the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, it's a sobering thought that when a society loses its way, indulging in unchecked sin, its fate can be catastrophic. The lessons from these cities should inspire us to live with integrity, humility, and respect for God's teachings. In today's world, where moral decay can sometimes be rampant, we must heed the warnings of history and strive to live lives of purpose, guided by righteousness. If you found this message enlightening, please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comment section below. Your support helps this channel grow, and together we can reach more people with these important messages. Thank you, and may God bless you always.